Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a stack of sources on a figure who did more than perhaps anyone else to define the physical and economic landscape of the modern American century, Henry Ford.
It's a challenging assignment because Ford, who lived from 1863 to 1947, is a study in profound, almost unbelievable contradictions.
Right.
On the one hand, he is this mechanical genius, the industrial revolutionary who literally put the middle class on wheels and, reinvented modern labor.
But on the other hand,
On the other, he was an isolationist, a deeply conspiratorial thinker, and one of the world's most prominent publishers of, well, virulent anti-Semitism.
and that's our mission today, to navigate this duality. We're unpacking the life and complex legacy of the man who founded the Ford Motor Company and is synonymous with the system known as Fordism.
And that system, it didn't just build cars cheaply. It revolutionized how we work, how we organize factories, and even how we view leisure time.
He fundamentally changed expectations for what a working life should be, right?
Totally. We're talking about the man who not only gave us the iconic Model T, but also pioneered the radical $5 daily wage and the 5-day work week.
These innovations were so profound, they just reset the standard for every competing industry globally.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's establish the scope of his impact immediately for you, the listener. He secured that crucial transmission patent in 1911, and thanks to his industrial methods, became one of the wealthiest people in the world.
He was the ultimate American success story, a triumph of self-made ingenuity.
But the sources mandate that we recognize the entire picture. His immense achievements are constantly shadowed by his politics, his conspiracy theories.
And the calculated use of his massive platform to disseminate hate speech, particularly against Jewish people. To understand Henry Ford, you have to hold both the visionary entrepreneur and the dangerous ideologue in the same frame.
Let's start with the foundation then, the mechanics of the man himself. Ford was born on a farm in Springwells Township, Michigan in 1863.
And the sources highlight that he was not, academically inclined, but possessed this singular, intense mechanical aptitude from a very, very young age.
That's key. His formal education was pretty limited.
Extremely. He finished 8th grade, taking only a brief bookkeeping course later on. His learning was purely experiential. He spent his childhood just obsessed with mechanisms.
And here's where that obsession really started to show. When he received a pocket watch from his father at age 12, he didn't just wear it.
No, he immediately started taking it apart.
Right. And he quickly gained a reputation as the local watch repairman by the time he was 15, because he was constantly dismantling and reassembling timepieces for friends and neighbors.
It wasn't about telling time. It was about mastering the internal gears and springs, the how of it.
And that aptitude was crystallized by a defining moment in 1875. As a 12-year-old, he saw something that changed his life.
The Nichols and Shepard road engine. The sources emphasize this was the first non-horse-drawn mode of self-propulsion he had ever seen.
And it just showed him that mechanical power could replace animal power on the road.
It fundamentally shaped his entire future focus.
So despite his father's wish that he take over the farm, his passion was clearly elsewhere. He left home at 16.
He moved to Detroit to apprentice as a machinist, first with James F. Flower and Brothers, and then the Detroit Dry Dock Company. He was just determined to work with engines.
But he did go back to the farm eventually in 1882.
He did, but not to farm. He went back to work with the Westinghouse portable steam engine, which powered threshing machines. This was a critical period of hands-on experience for him.
And it allowed him to start ruling out different engine types.
Exactly. He was very clear about his early technical dismissals. He thought steam was, and this is a quote, not suitable for light automobiles.
Why was he so convinced against steam power?
It was a safety issue, really. He believed the boilers required for steam engines were just inherently dangerous and unsuitable for a private consumer. Plus, they took forever to steam up.
He also ruled out electricity, which was actually quite popular at the time.
It was, but he saw the problems. The high cost of running trolley wires for commercial use, and the total lack of a practical, lightweight storage battery for private cars.
The power-to-weight ratio just wasn't there yet.
Not even close. So he dedicated himself entirely to the internal combustion engine. By 1890, he was building his own 2-cylinder engine,
Which led to his first completed motor car in 1892.
a simple 4-horsepower machine. But the crucial detail is that he didn't stop once it ran. He drove it around 1,000 miles between 1895 and 1896.
Constantly refining it, testing.
Yes, testing the durability of the engine and the materials in real-world conditions. This iterative, hands-on approach really defined his engineering philosophy.
Now let's look at the career move that gave him the runway for these experiments. In 1891, he joins the Edison Illuminating Company.
And he quickly becomes chief engineer in 1893. That promotion was the key inflection point. It gave him financial stability and the time to focus entirely on his engine experiments.
So he could work on his own projects without the pressure of just making ends meet.
Right, and that stability is what allowed him to complete the Ford quadricycle in 1896.
He test drove that first self-propelled automobile successfully on June 4th of that year. And it wasn't just a technical breakthrough.
It was a personal networking breakthrough. He met Thomas Edison himself later that year.
And Edison, known for encouraging innovators, offered immediate and strong support for Ford's work.
Imagine getting that validation. That encouragement from America's premier inventor must have been a monumental boost for Ford's confidence and credibility.
But success was not instantaneous. His first venture, the Detroit Automobile Company, founded in 1899. It failed.
It was dissolved just 2 years later. The sources indicate the vehicles simply weren't up to standard. They were lower quality than Ford wanted, and critically, they were priced too high for his vision.
He already had this idea of making cars for the masses.
He had a fundamental belief that cars should be affordable, and this first attempt just didn't meet that standard.
So he bounced back quickly with C. Harold Wills, designed a 26-horsepower racer that won in 1901, and that led to the Henry Ford Company. But even this second attempt was short-lived.
It was. In 1902, the investors who were concerned about his management brought in an expert named Henry M. Leland as a consultant.
And Ford, known for his volatility and his insistence on total control, just walked out.
He left immediately. And what's incredible is that Leland remained and renamed the operation the Cadillac Automobile Company. Ford essentially abandoned the company that would become a perennial luxury rival.
So after 2 failed corporate ventures, how do you get the backing for the third and finally successful attempt?
It all came down to a high-profile racing stunt. Ford partnered with the racing cyclist Tom Cooper and built this enormous 80-plus horsepower racer, the 999.
And they got Barney Oldfield, a famous cyclist, to drive it.
And he drove it to a spectacular victory in 1902. This was critical because it raised Ford's profile from just a regional machinist to a nationally recognized figure of speed and mechanical prowess. That's what finally convinced the coal dealer, Alexander Malcolmson, to back him.
And that sets the stage for the official founding of the Ford Motor Company in 1903.
They reincorporated as FMC with just $28,000 in seed capital, and the investor list tells a fascinating story of Detroit's emerging industrial class.
It really does. It included the Dodge brothers, John and Horace,
who were already supplying parts and accepted stock instead of cash when early sales were slow.
There was James Couzens, who became Ford's right-hand man, and John S. Gray,
Malcolmson's uncle, who was elected company president. And the sources make a point of noting that Gray was put in charge because of Ford's recognized volatility.
So they already knew he was a difficult, if brilliant, figure.
They did. His tendency to walk away or clash with partners was well established.
The name recognition, built on racing, then exploded with another massive publicity stunt.
Ford himself demonstrated a newly designed car on the ice of Lake St. Clair, setting a land speed record of 91.3 miles per hour.
That event cemented the brand nationally. It linked the Ford name with unprecedented speed and reliability.
But the true inflection point came 5 years later with the Model T, which debuted on October 1st, 1908.
And while Ford's 1911 transmission patent was important, the real genius of the Model T was in its practical mass-market design.
It was revolutionary.
Mechanically, what made it so different from everything else on the road?
There are several details that are often overlooked. First, Ford standardized the placement of the steering wheel on the left.
An industry first.
A total first, and soon copied by every other major automaker because it improved visibility for passing. Second, the engine was incredibly rugged. Its 4 cylinders were cast in a single solid block,
Which was simpler and cheaper to manufacture.
much cheaper. And third, and this was most critical for the consumer, was the planetary transmission.
Explain the significance of that for the lay listener.
Well, unlike modern cars that require complex gear shifting, the Model T was operated primarily with 3 foot pedals and a hand lever.
So it made driving incredibly simple and accessible.
Exactly. For people who had never been behind the wheel of a complex machine before, it was a game changer. It required no complex clutch operation, allowing the average person, especially in rural areas, to master it really quickly.
And its high clearance and ruggedness made it perfect for the poor roads, which was most of America at the time.
Absolutely. The design was tailored to meet the realities of rural America, making it a truly universal car.
It debuted at $825, which wasn't cheap initially.
No, but Ford's commitment to mass production meant he systematically lowered that price every single year.
And that reduction is the very foundation of Fordism.
It is. By 1916, the price had dropped to just $360 for the basic touring car. This commitment to cost reduction, leveraging scale, made the car affordable for the middle class. By the 1920s, a majority of American drivers had learned to drive on a Model T.
That insane volume required a manufacturing revolution, which brings us to the famous moving assembly line, introduced in 1913.
This is a critical nuance the sources clarify. While Henry Ford's name is synonymous with the assembly line, he didn't invent the concept of interchangeable parts or the basic idea of the line itself.
Right, the specific innovation was the moving assembly belt.
Exactly, the part that brought the work to the worker. And it was a collaborative effort. We have to credit the team of Clarence Avery, Peter E. Martin, Charles A. Sorensen, and C. Harold Wills for the engineering and implementation.
Ford's genius was in centralizing it, perfecting it.
And rigidly enforcing the tempo of the process.
And the results were just staggering. Sales hit 472,000 by 1916. By 1918, half of all cars in the U.S. were Model Ts.
That's an unbelievable degree of market saturation. The Model T, during its run, sold over 15 million units.
And this brings us to the famous quote about color. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black.
We often hear this as a sign of Ford's stubbornness, but the real reason is purely industrial efficiency.
Explain that connection. Why black?
Once the moving assembly line was established, the entire process was governed by tempo. They discovered that the commercially available black varnish paint had a significantly quicker drying time than any other color.
So it allowed workers to install the next component sooner and maintain the relentless speed of mass production.
Precisely. Customer choice was fully subordinated to the needs of the system, the core ethos of Fordism.
Despite this dominance, succession and control were constant issues within the company. In 1918, Henry nominally handed the presidency to his son Edsel.
But he absolutely refused to cede final decision authority. He was constantly undercutting Edsel's attempts to modernize the company.
And Henry was obsessed with securing sole ownership.
He achieved this through a dramatic maneuver. He announced the formation of a new company called Henry Ford and Son, publicly stating he was taking his best employees there to build a new, even cheaper vehicle.
Which was a total ruse.
A theatrical move designed to panic the minority stockholders of the Ford Motor Company into selling their stakes cheaply, because they feared the original company would collapse.
And it worked. Henry and Edsel purchased all the remaining stock.
It cost them about $106 million at the time, but it solidified the family's total private control of the corporation.
And it was Edsel who began pushing the company toward the upscale market, which Henry initially resisted. This is why the 1922 purchase of the Lincoln Motor Cup is so important.
It is, and Lincoln was founded by Henry M. Leland.
The same man who created Cadillac after Ford left his previous company? It all comes full circle.
It really does. And Edsel was much more attuned to the shifting market dynamics, while Henry was sort of stuck on the idea of the single, perfect, affordable car.
Which was becoming a problem.
A huge problem. By the mid-1920s, the Model T's time was up. General Motors, under Alfred Sloan, was challenging Ford's dominance with two revolutionary concepts.
The Price ladder.
A distinct car for every person purpose, from entry-level Chevrolet up to Cadillac. And second, GM introduced the concept of styling under Harley Earl, emphasizing aesthetic changes every year.
Something Henry Ford famously hated.
He despised it, and he was losing market share rapidly.
Flagging Model T sales finally forced him to relent. They had to shut down production for 18 months, leading to the creation of the Model A in 1927.
Ford oversaw the mechanical design, but he wisely delegated the body design to Edsel. This was a critical partnership, contrasting Henry's focus on engineering pragmatism with Edsel's appreciation for aesthetics.
And Edsel had to fight his father to include the sliding shift transmission.
He did. It mattered because it was the conventional transmission that every other automaker was using, the one we still recognize today. Ford opposed it because it was more complex and expensive to manufacture than the Model T's planetary system.
But the public had moved on. They wanted a modern driving experience.
And Edsel prevailed, making the Model A a much more marketable vehicle.
Ford continued to chase technical supremacy, though. In 1932, he released another bombshell, the low-price flathead Ford V8.
This was a result of a secret, intense development project. Prior to this, V8 engines were only for extremely expensive luxury cars like Cadillac or Packard. It was incredibly difficult to cast the engine block and heads for a V8 in a single piece, which was necessary to achieve Ford's low price point.
What's the significance of the flathead design?
The flathead refers to the valve placement. They were in the engine block, not in the cylinder head, which simplified the design. While not the most efficient, achieving a reliable V8 at an affordable price, often costing less than $500, gave Ford an immediate reputation for high performance.
And it became a favorite engine for hot rodders for decades.
For the next 2 decades, absolutely. It cemented the brand's performance image right up until the mid-1950s.
So we've analyzed the technical revolution, but Ford's legacy is equally defined by his contradictory philosophy on labor. He cared for his workers' prosperity, but only if they submitted to his rigid, highly intrusive social standards.
This brings us to the dual nature of welfare capitalism. The famous $5 day, announced in 1914, is the perfect starting point.
He more than doubled the average worker's daily wage from $2.34 to $5, a radical, headline-grabbing move.
It was. But the immediate pragmatic motivation wasn't altruism. It was, desperation over turnover.
The turnover rate was astronomical, 300% annually in some departments.
You simply can't run a precise, high-tempo assembly line when workers quit every few months. The move was immensely profitable despite the cost. The $5 wage attracted the absolute best, most disciplined mechanics in Detroit.
It drastically reduced turnover, raised productivity,
And lowered training costs. The system paid for itself very, very quickly.
but the sources also emphasized the philosophical element. Ford argued that by paying workers a living wage, he was creating a mass consumer base that could afford the very cars they were building.
Which would boost the entire national economy. But what's fascinating here is that the payment wasn't just a wage, it was tied to a profit-sharing scheme, but only for those who qualified.
And who determined qualification? The notorious social department.
The social department acted as Ford's moral police force.
They did.
Oh, yeah. Ford employed 50 investigators who would visit employees' homes unannounced. They frowned heavily on heavy drinking, gambling, any activity deemed frivolous.
So workers had to maintain standards approved by Ford to get the full $5.
Yes. In their domestic life, their savings, their morality, if you failed to conform, you didn't get the profit sharing, which reduced your wage significantly. It was an unprecedented intrusion into private life.
It sounds like he was trying to manufacture a compliant, disciplined workforce both inside and outside the factory walls.
That was the goal, to create the right kind of American consumer. However, the sources note that this paternalism was highly controversial, and by 1922, he backed off the most intrusive aspects, declaring, "Paternalism has no place in the industry."
That shift paved the way for his next massive labor innovation, the 5-day workweek.
In 1926, Ford switched factory workers to a 5-day, 40-hour week, a concept that was almost unheard of in heavy industry.
And his rationale was brilliantly simple.
He believed that increased leisure time, increased productivity workers would work harder during the 40 hours for the promise of the full weekend.
And he also connected it back to consumption.
He did. He argued that having decent leisure time was vital for the economy. Workers needed time to purchase and consume more goods, to drive their cars, to travel, to buy leisure products.
He said something like, leisure for workmen is not lost time or a class privilege.
Exactly. He saw the weekend as an engine of economic growth.
So that's the revolutionary paternalist side. But we have to confront the brutal, antagonistic anti-union crusade that defined his later labor years.
Ford was adamantly ideologically opposed to labor unions. He viewed union leaders as opportunistic troublemakers who fostered perpetual crises and sought to restrict the productivity he believed was essential for prosperity.
He saw them as self-defeating and inefficient.
To ensure his factories remained union-free, he employed Harry Bennett, a former Navy boxer, to head his paramilitary service department.
Essentially a private security force tasked with intimidation and espionage.
And this department was responsible for some shocking violence. The sources detailed 2 horrific events. The first was the 1932 Ford Hunger March.
Unemployed auto workers marched toward the River Rouge complex demanding jobs.
And the response was deadly. Dearborn police and Ford security forces opened fire on the protesters, resulting in over 60 injuries and 5 deaths. A massive public relations disaster.
Given the outcry from that, how could Ford allow Bennett's tactics to escalate again just 5 years later at the infamous Battle of the Overpass?
Ford was completely insulated by Bennett, and his rigid anti-union ideology only hardened. The 1937 Battle of the Overpass involved Bennett's men brutally attacking UAW organizers, including Walter Reuther, right outside the River Rouge plant.
The critical difference this time was photographic evidence.
Right. Photographs of the injured UAW members, covered in blood, appeared in newspapers nationwide the very next day.
And that turned public opinion irrevocably against Ford.
It symbolized the cruelty and brutality of his management style. Despite the pressure, Ford Motor Company remained the last Detroit automaker to recognize the UAW.
The resistance finally broke in 1941. What dramatic turning point finally compelled him to accept the union?
It took both industrial and personal crises. First, a sit-down strike closed the massive River Rouge plant, shutting down production. Second, and most decisively, his wife, Clara, intervened.
She and Edsel had long argued for union recognition.
They had, but Henry always used his veto power. Clara delivered an ultimatum. She threatened to sell her stock in the company if Henry did not fire Bennett and cooperate with the union. She believed his stubbornness was destroying the family business.
A phenomenal moment of personal influence over industrial policy. The wife standing up to the titan.
And Ford acquiesced. Almost instantly, Ford went from the most violent anti-union holdout to the automaker with the most favorable UAW contract terms in Detroit.
In a stunning reversal, Ford later told Walter Reuther that recognizing the UAW was one of the most sensible things Harry Bennett ever did.
It suggests he viewed the union as a potentially useful tool to combat his corporate rivals like General Motors.
Let's pivot now to Henry Ford's ideological side, which often ran counter to his business interests, starting with his isolationism and often bizarre pacifism during World War I.
Ford truly saw war as a terrible waste, believing it was only financed by greedy financiers who profited from conflict. He thought business efficiency and economic growth would naturally discourage warfare.
Which led to the highly ridiculed 1915 peace ship mission.
He personally funded and led 170 peace activists to Europe while the Great War was raging. It was a total fiasco. Met with ridicule, infighting, Ford abandoned the ship in Sweden and went home. Yet despite being a staunch pacifist, when the U.S. entered the war in 1917, Ford Motor Company became a massive supplier of war material.
A huge supplier. They built Liberty engines for warplanes and anti-submarine boats. This is the ultimate contradiction. The pacifist whose company armed the military.
And in the 1920s, that belief that war was caused by greedy financiers curdled into virulent anti-Semitism disseminated through his personal publishing empire.
In 1918, he purchased his hometown newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. About 18 months later, he started publishing a notorious series of articles under his name titled The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem.
Claiming a vast Jewish conspiracy was manipulating global politics and finance.
And the distribution model ensured this hate speech reached a staggering audience. That's the most insidious part.
How so?
Ford required every single one of his thousands of dealerships nationwide to carry and distribute the newspaper to their customers, ensuring maximum unavoidable exposure. The articles were then compiled into 4 volumes, translated, and distributed globally. And the sources confirm he also paid to print and distribute 500,000 copies of the fabricated text, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
He did. The scope of his cultural prejudice ran far deeper than just publishing.
You mean the bizarre details about how he tried to control American culture?
It's fascinating. Ford actively funded square dancing in American schools. Why? Because he hated jazz music, which he personally associated with Jewish people, seeing it as degenerate.
This small, curious detail highlights how deep and strange his desire to control American culture ran, extending even down to the types of music children were allowed to enjoy.
He wanted to manage not just the factory floor, but the moral texture of the nation.
But the real-world, tragic impact was most severe overseas, particularly in Germany. What was the connection to the burgeoning Nazi movement?
Henry Ford is the only American mentioned favorably in Adolf Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf. Hitler reportedly kept a life-size portrait of Ford behind his desk and regarded Ford as his inspiration.
He modeled the Volkswagen Beetle, the people's car, directly on the Model T philosophy.
Simple, standardized, and mass-produced for the common person. And the Nazi regime recognized and rewarded this ideological influence directly.
They gave him a medal.
On Ford's 75th birthday in July 1938, the German consul presented him with the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest medal Nazi Germany could bestow upon a foreigner.
And the lasting, tragic nature of his propaganda was confirmed during the Nuremberg trials.
Indeed. Baldur von Schirach, the convicted Hitler youth leader, testified that The International Jew was the decisive anti-Semitic book that influenced him and his comrades in the early days of the Nazi Party.
So Ford's hate speech directly influenced the men who perpetrated the Holocaust.
The sources are clear on that.
The publication eventually stopped in 1927, but only after a high-profile libel lawsuit.
Brought by Jewish farm cooperative organizer Aaron Sapiro, Ford closed the Independent and issued a public retraction.
But the apology's sincerity is questionable.
Highly questionable. Investigative reporting suggests Ford never truly signed the retraction, that his signature was forged by Harry Bennett, and Ford himself stated in 1940, "I hope to republish The International Jew again sometime,"
suggesting his personal beliefs remained largely unchanged.
Exactly. Distribution of the book was finally halted in 1942 by Ford's own legal action, yet it remains banned in Germany today, though extremist groups recycle the material constantly online. It's a dark, persistent shadow on his legacy.
It is. Now, let's consider World War II. Despite his history with the Nazis and his ongoing isolationist views, Ford Motor Company became a linchpin of the Allied victory.
Responding to President Roosevelt's call for the arsenal of democracy, Ford directed the construction of the massive Willow Run aircraft factory near Detroit. The sheer scale of that project is almost incomprehensible.
It was a monumental achievement.
3.5 million square feet, making it the largest assembly line in the world at the time. Ford applied the principles of Fordism standardization, efficiency, relentless tempo to building B-24 bombers.
What were the production numbers at its peak?
By 1944, Willow Run was producing 650 B-24s per month. The efficiency gains were so dramatic that by 1945, Ford was completing one B-24 every 58 minutes.
Incredible.
Overall, Ford produced 9,000 of the 18,000 B-24s built during the war, making his company absolutely essential to the Allied cause, regardless of his personal ideological opposition to the U.S. entry into the war.
Beyond cars and controversy, Ford was a relentless experimenter, a titan of globalization, and his interests ranged far outside typical industrial manufacturing.
Ford's philosophy, despite his political isolationism, was centered on global trade as a driver of peace and efficiency. He pushed for economic independence for the U.S. through vertical integration.
The River Rouge plant being the prime example.
Exactly, producing every component, from raw ore to finished steel. But simultaneously, he sought massive global expansion.
That global strategy began very early. He opened assembly plants in Britain and Canada in 1911.
And by 1929, he had active dealerships on 6 continents. He even extended his global reach to the Soviet Union.
The 1929 deal to help them build their first automobile plant.
A massive deal, providing technical aid for 9 years to help the Soviets build the GAZ plant. This involved shipping $30 million worth of knockdown cars and trucks and stationing Ford engineers in the Soviet Union while training Soviet engineers in Detroit.
That's a fascinating ideological clash.
Yeah.
The ultimate capitalist working directly with the communists.
But his core belief overrode political ideology. He declared that wherever industry prospers, the more profit there will be for everyone, including us. He believed the universal language of efficiency and manufacturing would lead to modernization and peace.
We can't discuss his global ambition without mentioning one of his most infamous failures, Fordlandia.
The commercial rubber plantation he established in the Amazon jungle, it was a spectacular, expensive failure.
Why did it fail so badly?
He tried to apply the rigid, centralized labor and production methods of Detroit to the Brazilian jungle, ignoring local agricultural and environmental realities. It failed to produce viable rubber and alienated its workforce. But the attempt itself shows the sheer scale of his ambition.
And it's clear that Ford's ideas traveled well. His entire manufacturing concept, Fordism, transfixed Europeans.
Especially the Germans during the interwar period. They saw Fordism as the quintessentially American capitalist model, the key to modernization and scale. Ford's methods were studied, copied, and lauded across the continent.
Let's turn back to his sheer inventive output. He was awarded 161 U.S. patents. He was deeply interested in materials science and sustainability.
He was an early adopter of advanced metallurgy, using vanadium steel alloys to make his cars lighter and stronger. But his most curious pursuit involved agricultural products, particularly soybeans.
His relationship with George Washington Carver.
Exactly, for research into soybean-based plastics. And these plastics were actually utilized in car parts, like horns and paint, throughout the 1930s.
This research culminated in his 1942 plastic car.
It had a body made almost entirely of soybean-based plastic attached to a welded frame. It weighed 30% less than a steel car and was designed to run on ethanol.
It never achieved commercial success, but the research was groundbreaking.
It demonstrated his commitment to blending industry and agriculture. He even turned factory waste into profit. He was instrumental in developing Kingsford charcoal briquettes.
Using the wood scraps from the Ford factory.
That's right. He saw waste as inefficiency, and the charcoal briquette was a direct byproduct of his obsessive vertical integration philosophy.
And finally, we need to touch on his commitment to preserving Americana and technological history.
He was a massive collector. He founded the Edison Institute, now the Henry Ford Museum, and Greenfield Village in Dearborn, dedicated to practical technology and history. He literally collected historic structures and had them moved to the village for preservation.
He also owned homes in Fort Myers, Florida, right next to Thomas Edison.
And the massive 70,000-acre Ford plantation in Richmond Hill, Georgia. And just for context on his other interests, the sources confirm he was a 33rd-degree Freemason, though he publicly opposed smoking, publishing an anti-smoking book in 1914.
The final years of Ford's life are a tragic coda to his industrial empire, marked by decline, internal strife, and ultimately a forced exit from the company he created.
The crisis began with the death of his son and company president Edsel in 1943 at the age of 49.
Edsel's death was devastating for Henry.
Both personally and professionally. Despite being nearly 80 and increasingly debilitated by a series of strokes, Ford nominally resumed control of the company presidency.
But by this point, his mental ability was fading rapidly. He was highly suspicious and relied heavily on the counsel of Harry Bennett, who only made things worse.
The corporate deterioration was rapid and severe. The sources confirmed the company was losing over $10 million a month.
The situation became so dire that during the peak of World War II, the Roosevelt administration seriously considered a government takeover of the company.
That fact alone underscores the danger his continued presence posed to the American war effort. And in his declining state, Ford displayed increasing jealousy and paranoia. He forced out key executive Charles Sorensen, who had been instrumental in developing the moving assembly line.
Simply because he was jealous of the positive press Sorensen received.
Right. The company was functionally being run by subordinates and the menacing hand of Harry Bennett.
So how was the aging titan finally removed?
It took another powerful, personal ultimatum, this time orchestrated in 1945 by his wife, Clara, and Edsel's widow, Eleanor.
They were staring down the barrel of bankruptcy.
They were. And they saw the company collapsing under Henry's erratic control and Bennett's mismanagement. They controlled the leverage.
3/4 of the company stock between them.
They confronted the aging Henry, threatening to sell their controlling stake on the open market if he did not immediately cede control to his 28-year-old grandson, Henry Ford II.
A dramatic confrontation where he had absolutely no choice but to give in. The legacy of the entire empire was saved by the women of the family.
Henry Ford retired completely, and young Henry Ford II took over. His very first and most consequential act was immediately firing Harry Bennett and dismantling the despised service department.
Beginning the process of modernizing the company.
He was. Henry Ford was given one final honor shortly before his death. In 1946, he was honored at the Automotive Golden Jubilee for putting the world on wheels.
A fitting recognition of his genius, separate from his controversies.
Exactly. He died the following year on April 7, 1947, at the age of 83 from a cerebral hemorrhage. His public viewing drew thousands of people per hour, all coming to pay respects to the man who, for better or worse, had changed their lives forever.
So what does this deep dive ultimately mean? We've explored the full, difficult picture of Henry Ford, the visionary who revolutionized industrial production side by side with the ideologue who used his immense platform to spread some of the most damaging hate speech of the 20th century.
The complexity is the key takeaway. Ford was the engineer who standardized efficiency on a global scale. Fordism became the template for modern manufacturing. Yet he resisted corporate modernization, from styling and finance to unions, until he was almost forced into bankruptcy.
Understanding him requires integrating the brilliant entrepreneur with the deeply flawed, regressive ideologue.
His success was so profound, but his ideology was so damaging. It's a chilling reminder that revolutionary genius in one field often does not translate to wisdom or morality in others.
And the platform afforded by wealth can amplify both good and evil.
Absolutely. And as you mull over the immense contradictions of the man who sold half the cars in America, here is a final provocative thought for you to consider, connecting his factory floor ethos to his cultural paranoia.
Lay it on us.
Think about the lengths Ford went to control not just the price of his product or the moral life of his employee, but American culture itself. His anti-Semitism manifested in bizarre, small ways, not just in publishing The International Jew and influencing Hitler,
But also through actively funding square dancing in American schools.
because he associated jazz music with Jewish people. This detail illustrates how fundamentally deep and strange his desire to control the nation ran. He wanted to dictate not only how people worked and drove, but what they listened to.
That desire for total control over the wage, the product, and the cultural texture of the entire nation, that might be the most comprehensive and chilling legacy of Henry Ford. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.